औज़ुबिल्लाहिमिनश्शैतानिर्रजीम बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। अस्सलाम वालेकुम नाज़रीन, मैं हूँ आपके मेज़बान फ़ायज़ा नकवी। इस दुआ के साथ कि जहाँ रहें खुश रहें, आबाद रहें, अल्लाह ताला की पेशवा रहमतों बरकतों उसके फ़ज़ल और करम के साए में रहें। परवरदिगार आप सबको सभी अपनों समेत दो जहाँ के शर से महफूज रखे, दो जहाँ का खैर कसीर आप सबके मुकद्दर में करे, इस दुनिया को अमन और अमान का गहवारा बनाए और हम सबको इस काबिल करे कि अपने वक्त के इमाम के सच्चे मुखलिस तरीन जो सबकत ले जाने वाले, वादों को निभाने वाले, रुकावटों को अबूर करने वाले और ज़मीना साजी करने वाले अंसार और आवाम में शामिल हो सकें। और तमाम मज़लूमीन बहन भाई जो फ़लस्तीन में हैं, गज़ा में हैं, कश्मीर में हैं, लबनान, सूडान और म्यांमार, यमन, इराक़, शाम, जहाँ जहाँ भी मज़लूम इंसानियत और मखलूक़ात खुदा इस वक्त अज़ियतों, रंजो गम, दुखों और जंगों का शिकार हैं, परवरदिगार उन सब के दुख, रंजो गम को सुकून और दायमी कामयाबियों से बदल दे। और तमाम ज़ालिमीन जहाँ बिलखसूस जो हिदायत याफ्ता नहीं हैं, उन सब को नीस्तो नाबूद करे, उनके शर को उनकी तरफ पलटाए और उनको दुनिया के लिए इबरत का निशान बनाए और वक्त के इस इमाम के ज़हूर में ताजील फरमाए इंशाल्लाह आमीन। आज नाज़रीन मंडे का दिन है और 24 नवंबर है, 2 जमादुल सानी है और अयाम फातिमा सलामुल्लाह अलैहा के उन्वान से भी आप सबको हदी और बिलखुसूस इमाम ज़माना और चाहरदा मासूमीन के हुज़ूर जो है हदिया ताज़ियत उनकी शहादत के उन्वान से पेश करना चाहूँगी और दुआ करेंगे कि अल्लाह ताला इन दिनों के जो तुफ़ैल हम सब की आखिरत और दुनिया को और हमारी नस्लों को हमेशा हमेशा इमाम वक्त के अवान और अंसार मुखलिसान साथियों में शामिल फरमाए, जो अहले बसीरत होते हैं, और जो हमेशा हरकत में रहते हैं इंशाल्लाह आमीन। आज हमारे फर्स्ट पार्ट में हम जो गुफ्तगू करेंगे वो इंटरनेशनल पॉलिटिक्स पे होगी। सो वी विल टॉक अबाउट वर्ल्ड पॉलिटिक्स स्पेशली इन टर्म्स ऑफ Gaza, Sudan, and overall situation which is going on in terms of Trump's around the globe and what's going on at the moment currently, and what are the key factors we really need to look at. So we do have a very prestigious guest with us, Sayyid Mohsin Abbas. We'll move on to him and we'll welcome him on the show. Assalamu alaikum, Mohsin bhai. Thank you so much for joining us today, this morning, and we would like to welcome you on the show and would like to convey heartiest condolences regarding Hazrat Fatima Salamullah Alaiha martyrdom anniversary, and would like to get your overall viewpoint, especially first of all, like a complete analysis in the sense, if we look at this word like a chessboard and where there is a situation related to Gaza, there is a situation going on in Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and everywhere. And how do you see these key players which are associated with with this cause in terms of like people who are fighting for Gaza and the people who are fighting against the people of Gaza, for instance? And what are the key elements we really need to look at, and we can't like ignore them, especially at this stage, at this time when there is very strong and very dire situation going on in Gaza in terms of humanitarian crisis at the moment as well. So how would you like to share your analysis on that?
Assalamu alaikum, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It's an honor to be back with you, Sister Faiza. I apologize for not coming more often. We've obviously got our deep dive perspective podcast, which has been keeping me very busy. But it's interesting that Gaza is the issue that you raised, of course, because it's still central. The Zionist Western Empire and its media machine would like you to believe that the problem has gone away and there's a ceasefire and there's actually a pathway to some kind of so-called peace. First of all, peace isn't possible without justice, and liberation is not possible without either. So reality is, what do the Gazans want? They want liberation. And what do Palestinians want? They want liberation. I think the first distinction I have to make is that the Western media tends to focus on this notion of ceasefires and peace and settlement based on parameters which they've set, which at best are from 1967 and what happened after that war, and at worst, it's basically the situation as it exists with settler colonialists constantly occupying more and more of whatever scraps of land they left for the Palestinians. So in reality, there is no ceasefire. 257, maybe not actually, that yesterday's figure was 325 Palestinians have been killed since the so-called ceasefire. So what ceasefire? Lebanon is being shelled and bombed daily. Yesterday, a senior Hezbollah commander was martyred, along with 4 other soldiers. So what ceasefire? Syria is being occupied, and Israeli soldiers literally moved into Quneitra checkpoints over the last couple of days. What ceasefire? There is no ceasefire. In Yemen is still a target, and the Islamic Republic of Iran is still being targeted with nefarious operations. So nowhere has the Anglo-Zionist war to subjugate the Muslim world, the free Muslim world, I would call it, because there's a enslaved Muslim world, largely represented by those Arab leaders who are Arab and other non-Arab leaders who've bend the knee. Kazakhstan was the latest one. They accepted the Abraham Accords, as have Morocco, as have the UAE. So there are these different sectors within the Muslim world, those who are cowards and who sold out their nation's sovereignty, sold out their nation's wealth to the Zio-American empire. Some would call it Pax Judaica. Sheikh Imran Hussein, a well-known Sunni eschatologist, talks about Pax Judaica rather than Pax America, having moved on from Pax Britannia. I think that they're all still together, to be fair, whether it's Pax Judaica, Pax America, Pax Britannia. I don't think either of them gone. They're all in leagues. This is the triumvirate which leads the murder, killing, and the maiming that goes on. As you hinted, the other thing that hasn't changed in this so-called ceasefire is that the humanitarian aid is not being sent according to the levels that were meant to be sent. I think something like 600 trucks were agreed. It's far less than that. The last count I had was not more than 200-300 trucks going through. It may be even less. So the starvation, the famine, the disease, this is still being exacerbated. The murder of Gazans is still continuing. The violation of the rights of Palestinians in the West Bank in terms of settlers, that's still being encouraged. That violence has increased, and more land is being occupied daily. In amongst this, of course, Donald Trump is trying to sell the idea that he's created a peace, and in reality, what they want is the entire axis of resistance to surrender. So surrendering for the Gazans, surrendering for Hezbollah, surrendering for Iran. This is what Donald Trump's dream is, but he's achieved none of it because the H groups are saying, no, we're not going to surrender, we're not going to give up our arms. There have to be conditions which are met. The Americans have turned around and said, well, we're going to put together a military force or an interim force which will oversee Gaza. So the question is, who's going to be part of that, and who's going to run that show? The H groups have said we're not interested. Any group that comes into this territory is going to be regarded as a proxy of the Zionist regime, and they will be treated in the same way by the H groups, and they will carry on their resistance. So it's all about trying to stop the armed resistance, to disarm that axis of resistance, so that the Israelis can carry out their Greater Israel program. That's what's going on in a nutshell in that little region of the world. But the resistance, as I say, hasn't been defeated in Gaza, let alone in Lebanon. And in spite of all the bluff and bluster that America's given, you'll see that in Lebanon, the people are more and more united. The Lebanese established military was told to disarm the Hezb, and they couldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. They're not going to do it. And they've now started pushing back against the American pressure, and the Americans have said back that they will now not be able to hold back Israel from carrying out more violence, which, to be fair, they've started. The Israelis, for the first time, bombed Beirut, and his commander, who was killed, is the first one in actual Beirut city. They've been bombing other areas every day. There's 3 to 5 people, 6 people being killed. They're target killing people from the resistance in Lebanon daily, and they're also targeting the villages and many of the places they claim are weapons depots, whatever. Most of it is just pure lies, and they're getting to do what they couldn't do during the war, because if you remember that Israel didn't move even inches beyond the established border when they were actually facing a fight. But since then, I think the Lebanese resistance strategy has been to say, okay, so they've gone for the cowardly approach of bombing the entire Beirut city, and they've tried to create a sense that they won the war against theirs, but in reality, all they did was bomb civilians and children, and they managed to get an agreement where many of the people in Lebanon wanted some sort of ceasefire, and it happened. But the reality is, as I've said, they've not abided by it. The H group hasn't violated that ceasefire at all, as goes for the Palestinians. It's the Israelis constantly violating ceasefires. And I think that's, in summary, there's more to say on this, but I'll take a pause on this, that always the West wants to talk about this ceasefire business and not deal with the root cause. And I'll go into what the root cause is of Gaza's problem is, because Gaza's problem is actually the whole West Asian problem with desire Western impact.
True. So, as you have mentioned, very important factors related to Gaza. So, how do you see the assassination of this Hezbollah leader? Do you think that would, down the morale of Hezbollah at the moment, for example, and how resistance forces are doing in terms of the way they are supposed to fight and all that? Do you think they are fighting enough, like with that, with the same in the same way as they have initiated everything, for example, or whatever was going on from from start? And how is the situation within Israel itself? Like in between, there was so much political chaos going on in Israel as well. So people were against Netanyahu as well, and around the globe, so much hatred is related to Netanyahu. We can see it as well. So how do you see these two aspects, in the sense of, like, when we like analyze the situation, that we see these are the, like, key resistance forces who are fighting, and obviously they are fighting, and they and we can see that they couldn't achieve any war goals so far, even after the ceasefire or before that as well. So they can't disarm, for example, Hamas and all that. So how do you see this aspect, along with the other aspect of recent the passing of resolution in I think so, United Nations, or in a General Assembly, so in which Pakistan voted in favor of that resolution as well. So how do you see the role of Pakistan as well in this whole equation, what they are trying to do, like what America is trying to achieve from Pakistan? Because they, just like Arab leaders, they are also kind of slave mentality, and it's so much painful to see that as well. But sadly, this is how it is. So how do you see the situation of Pakistan? What kind of role they are going to play as leadership, or whatsoever you call it, like in terms of their role in Gaza and its administration and stuff like that?
Well, we'll come on to Pakistan as a secondary thing, but first of all, the issue of Israel's internal situation and the issue of this resolution that's been passed, it's all interlinked. So I'll try and cover these three things. The first thing is that these UN resolutions come and go, and the fact that the UN passed this tells you, first of all, that the UN is a puppet of the Zio-American empire, always has been. The UN was created after the Second World War to look after the interests of the great powers. That's the purpose of it. In fact, every institution internationally that was created after the Second World War was designed to safeguard the interests of the money mafias, the parasites who run things even behind the American and the British political and economic establishments. The fact of the matter is that the UN, the WHO, World Trade Organization, World Bank, any of them, all of them that have been operating and running in any shape and form today are basically puppets of the same system. America used to, I mean, it still funds the UN and it's still based in New York, and the UN has clearly got a threat from them that they have to act in a certain way. And in fact, most of the people who are part of the UN are all servile states of the United States empire, and they also know that if they step out of line, they're going to get sanctioned. Because what happens to Venezuela or Russia or Iran would be exactly what they would do to everybody else. So the Americans' attitude is to use these institutions as a way of rubber stamping whatever they want. And of course, you can't discount also the fact that Russia and China both abstained in this vote. So the supposed peace plan that Trump proposed for Gaza in this resolution is essentially just giving Israel more license. It's allowing it to control more territory. It's not giving the Palestinians any rights. It's ignoring all the what I call the root causes. And of course, there's a strong belief within anybody who's got any sense in the media circles that basically the call for this kind of resolution and ceasefire in reality ignores the fact that what should be happening is Palestinians should be given a referendum. The right of return should be given to Palestinians to come back, those who've been exiled, the millions that are outside of their homeland. The one-state solution is the only solution that should be on the table. The dismantling of Israel, an apartheid racist state, no different from South Africa and no different from Nazism or the British Empire, the way it operated. It's the same kind of model. It's a racist, supremacist. Some would say Jewish supremacist because they say we're a Jewish state now. They openly say it. Netanyahu doesn't consider it a secular state. His guys are saying we're a Jewish state. So they're using this kind of religious fundamentalism, this religious extremism, this very racist ideology to subjugate Palestinians. How can you accept a state like that? It wouldn't be acceptable anywhere else in the world. If you said that was happening in Britain or anywhere else openly, we would all openly have to fight it. So this is the fundamental injustice, and the goals which I've just outlined of what the real justice solutions for Palestine are things which these resolutions don't take into account. So, I mean, there's a lack of enforcement, though, of these kinds of mechanisms. So that's the hope. Often the UN is a toothless tiger. It can't enforce things. And the Americans also won't be able to enforce things on the ground if the Palestinians don't want it, or if the Lebanese don't want it. So they can pass as many resolutions as they like. As long as the resistance is there, they won't be able to implement them effectively. That's the first thing. As far as the veto goes, we know that America uses its veto to constantly manipulate this UN, all the kind of the ongoing failures that we've seen in terms of UN's ability to do anything about anything that's worthwhile. It's because of this veto, and the veto is fundamentally undemocratic, which again tells you that it's unfair. Why are 5 nations able to hold a veto and the rest of the world is powerless? Why do they get an excess preference? If they love democracy so much, they should start first of all practicing democracy in the United Nations, which is supposed to be the international body which champions freedom and equality and all this. So it's all lies. We need to forget about things like the UN and anything they do. Moving on to Israel, well, internally, we now know that many of the Israelis, maybe up to 1 million, maybe more, have already emigrated. They hold dual nationalities. The exodus is real because the northern part of Israel is still not safe for the occupiers to go back into places like Kiryat Shimona. It's still not safe for them to go to Ashkelon down in the south. and there's still resistance, of course, in the West Bank as well. So they are not comfortable. The missiles of Yemen were still raining in, and although they've currently paused the attack because of the ceasefire, they've pledged as well that they will shut down the Bab al-Mandeb again if they see the violation continue. So it's all very much on a knife edge in terms of Israel's economy. The Eilat port is still shut down. It doesn't have any viability. So they've had to reroute much of their goods, which costs them more, coming through the Mediterranean, the long route down through the Horn of Africa. Most of the companies are still going down that way, costing them enormous amounts of money. And of course, internally, Israel's economy is also in trouble because the unemployment level, of course, goes up. You can't function when missiles are likely to land on your head constantly. And they had so many people who were drafted formally into the military that a lot of people have had to stop other jobs. The tourism industry collapsed. They're in Cyprus now. Many of these is SAPs, the Israeli dual nationals. They've run off to places like Cyprus, and Cyprus is complaining about a flood of Israelis beginning to occupy their country as well. So there are many other nations, mostly East European, American, etc. So they're all over the place. That's all a sign that Israel isn't comfortable, and internally they've got the huge political differences also building up. There are tensions and psychological problems within the army. I can cite as another example of the fracture. There is an epidemic of psychological mental health problems now going on amongst the Israeli military, and in fact that was part of the reason they had to stop the assault on Palestine, because they couldn't recruit fresh soldiers that were willing to come out and fight. They've been trying to get recruits from various places, and unsuccessfully, largely. So they can't actually maintain the military and its own morale, having killed babies, bombed them to death for 2 years, and taken all sorts of other barbaric actions. You can imagine that the condition of many of these people who are already quite programmed to be psychopathic and programmed to be Jewish supremacists and violent ones at that. All of this is part of the symptom that are obviously going to come when you commit a genocide. And so it's not looking good for them internally. And if this was to continue and be projected over 5 years, or say 10 years, then how long can it survive? And only is America's something like $4 billion is openly committed to Israel. Israel's been asking them for another $100 billion just recently for more arms and weapons. The Americans have been arming and weaponizing Israel even more. They've been talking about upgrading the Arrow system, the THAAD system. There's an extra THAAD system I think they pulled in there. They've also, the David Sling mechanism and the Iron Dome, they're trying to upgrade that so that they can stand a better chance of defending Israel's myth of impregnability, which was shattered by the Islamic Republic of Iran in the 12-day war. You saw within the 12-day war that by the end of it, it was Israel that was begging for a ceasefire. But they didn't do it openly. They told the Americans to step in and to bring it to an end, and that was an excuse with the so-called bombing of the nuclear facilities, which was like a superficial bombing, to be fair, of Iranian nuclear facilities, old nuclear facilities in peripheral. And that gave the Americans and the Israelis an excuse to say, let's stop. But the reason they really stopped was because Iran was firing hypersonic missiles by the end, which were so accurate that they took out the Weizmann Institute, which is one of the world's leading genetic, genetic engineering industries in the world. They took out the Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv. That's how direct it was. They hit lots of other secret sites, which the Israelis don't want to admit. But I think once the Israelis saw just how precise and how accurate and how penetrative those missiles were, they had to call it a day. Otherwise, within another, say, month or so, most of Tel Aviv's major centers could have been wiped out. Why Iran didn't finish the job? Well, of course, that America's sitting in the background. Nobody wants to war directly with a nation which has thousands of nuclear weapons and an arsenal of weaponry which could kill civilians. And they please kill civilians. So I think Iran in the end opted for an option of saying, well, look, we've created a deterrence. The Israelis now know that we can destroy them if we want to. But let's pause, because at the same time, Iran doesn't want Tehran to be hit. It doesn't want its own major cities to be hit. So nobody wants war. Nobody sensible wants a war. Only the Israelis want war. Only these mad psychopathic Zionist moneylender mafias, which are out there, they might want war because they've ruined the global economy and they might want to collapse it. So that's the only thing I can think of. Like picking a fight with Iran is like saying we want to collapse the global economy. Now, why would you want to do that? It's not going to be Iran that will only be affected if the Hormuz Strait is shut down by Iran, for instance, or if they bomb all the oil fields across West Asia. It'll be the entire world's economy going into a complete freefall and meltdown, and we wouldn't be spared. Our prices here, our inflation, everything would go completely haywire. So no sensible person wants war, I think, except for these potentially these parasite economic money mafias and the Zionists who are desperate for their kind of third temple to be built on Masjid al-Aqsa. That seems to be their psychopathic desire as well. This is the state of play, I think. And the last question you raised was about Pakistan. Pakistan is perplexing. It's a crucial country. It has nuclear weapons. Israel and Netanyahu have said, and they're on record to say, that Pakistan is the problem after Iran and all these nations. So you can bet your bottom dollar, if they finish off Iran, if they take Iran out of the equation through regime change or through the techniques they want to use, they can't do it through war directly, but they are still going to try to get internal insurgencies, color revolutions, those same old tricks which haven't worked. They'll continue trying those. And if they were to, let's say, for example, they were to bring the Islamic Republic of Iran down, it would mean the whole of West Asia essentially would be open for Greater Israel. Nobody else would oppose the Greater Israel project, and the Zionists would literally be physically able to occupy vast swathes of the Muslim world, or their neighbors at least, from as far as the Euphrates to even Sinai into Egypt down to the Nile. This is a scenario which the Muslims certainly have to think carefully about, that by eliminating Iran, by siding with Israel, these Gulf Arab nations are essentially giving complete open carte blanche for the Greater Israel project to be realized. Of course, Pakistan is a massive power and could also take a massive role in this region because, of course, they're already embedded in Saudi Arabia. You saw just about a few weeks ago, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia entered into a new military pact with Pakistan. That was the first stirring that we saw with Pakistan in recent times for this region. And the Pakistanis pledged that they would defend the KSA regardless of anything. So whoever posed a threat to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, they would be its enemy. What does that mean, essentially? The only potential threat to the Kingdom of the only threat, according to the Iranians, the activists of resistance. They nominally say also the Muslim Brotherhood. And the KSA in Saudi Arabia is a puppet. So there's a puppet of Americans that are Zionists. For Pakistan to go in and protect them, it's essentially siding with Anglo-Zionist imperialism. It's siding with Saudi Arabia against Iran, because you'll also note that the Saudis are now buying the F-35s for the first time. That's the carrot that's been dangled to Saudi Arabia to normalize with Israel. And Saudi Arabia is thinking about it, and the Americans have said, well, giving you the F-35s means that this is what you're going to have to do. So the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is now very much being pushed, or is itself getting the confidence to start thinking about normalizing with Israel, and then at the same time defending itself, potentially through Pakistani military force. Those F-35s, by the way, the only pilots that could really handle it from the Muslim world is the Pakistani pilots. And the chances are very much that they would be the ones who would be flying those planes, or Israelis. It could be Israeli pilots as well. Anyhow, that's by the way, Saudi Arabia certainly doesn't have that kind of fight. So And the F-35s that the Americans will give the guns, if they give them, will only be like a watered down version of what they have. They won't have all the technology same missiles. They'll give them some sort of like downgraded version to make it look like that they do them. But that would be enough to give Saudi Arabia considerable strength if it felt it was going to be attacked by Iran. The reality is Iran has never contemplated attacking Saudi Arabia. It's the reverse. The reality is that Saudis keep their bases for Americans and Israelis to be able to attack Iran. That's the actual thing. So you see how things are playing out there. Pakistan's goal already is beginning to manifest. I think the first Pakistani soldiers were killed in action in Yemen too. So Saudi is already using Pakistani soldiers to fight its dirty war in Yemen, which still rumbles on the border quietly. It's not full blown, but the skirmishes still take place. At the same time, the Taliban, the ISIS brigade are being revitalized in southern Yemen, along with the other Al Qaeda and Muslim Brotherhood types. So there's a lot going on there, and Pakistan is now becoming part of this. At the same time, you see, of course, the clashes with Afghanistan. You know, why is Pakistan kicking off in Afghanistan? Yes, there is an insurgency. Yes, there are American funded and financed terrorists, the TTP being the primary one, Taliban, but also there are others like the Al-Qaeda forces, and many others. So, of course, that old chestnut of terrorism, sponsored by America, is very much alive in northern Pakistan, and Pakistan has its own operatives as well, as you know. For many years, they also nurtured some of these so-called people to do their work as well. So, in a way, Pakistan's having to deal with problems it's created for itself by being a servant of America and doing its bidding in Afghanistan in the past through their support under General Zia of the American initiatives against Russia and against the Islamic. So Pakistan has got itself to blame, ended up with 3 million Afghans inside its own territory, which is now expelling or expelled most of them. And of course, the unrest that's a perfect ground for the Americans to use these kind of people, use these disparate forces to start causing trouble for Pakistan internally. And what they want is they want Pakistan to be denuclearized. They want Pakistan to be fragmented and balkanized. They want the Balochistan especially to be ripped away from Pakistan so that they can have access to the huge amounts of resources that exist in Balochistan. That's the game. And by creating unrest on the border through these terrorist groups and through the Balochi Liberation Army and others that are funded by India and the Americans, they're basically threatening the Pakistani establishment, saying, look, if you don't play ball, do as we're told, we can create a balkanized Pakistan. We could create chaos. And in return for that, the favors, the threat of destabilizing Pakistan, it would mean that the military generals would have to start playing ball with the Americans and say, okay, let's save our sovereignty, save our kind of corrupt piece of pie, but they also have their noses in the trough, or as does Nawaz Sharif, as does Zardari and the rest of that old crony plan. They all then compromise and say, look, as long as we all make money, dump the people, and we'll come and do your bidding even in West Asia. And I'm surprised that they don't even give away their nuclear power, to be honest, with the corruption and the sellout nature of a lot of these people means that nothing is impossible. But of course, they wouldn't get away with that with the public, so that's not on the cards. But they will, of course, continue, I think, down these lines. They've got fraternal relationships, they say, with Iran. They keep Iran nuclearized, and indeed, in the 12-day war, Pakistan evidently gave radar assistance or some sort of logistical information to Iran to support it against Israel. So there's a curious game going on there, whether there's one wing of the Pakistan military which is trying to create a balance and not go further towards indications with Iran. There's a lot of border clashes with the terrorists that are based in Balochistan, Pakistan, they come into Iran and start killing people, police officers, and soldiers and civilians. So there's this ongoing tension there about terrorism on the border of Iran and Pakistan as well. So you can see Pakistan is very much involved without coming above the radar. But all this is very, very interesting for the future relationship with the Anglo-Zionist Empire in West Asia and its relationship with Pakistan in the long run as well.
True. So, because time is moving very fast, and the analysis you share, especially related to Pakistan, is very important as well. So we also see that Pakistan is like establishing some new relationships as well with different countries which are very close to, for example, Israel and all that. So this is one important factor as well. And for the people who, I mean, for us as, for example, Pakistanis, what sort of duty do you think we owe towards the Palestinian brothers and sisters, for instance? Because all that is happening in front of our eyes, and we are still just watching, just like other Muslim countries and the people over there, because we can see whatever is happening, it is happening on this and on the ground, strong grounds of like Arab leaders, association help and support, and the agreements and the promises and the fair and the you can say greed of and enslavement. And now obviously Pakistan has also reflected the same thing in their character as well. So what kind of role as a community we owe in that terms? And secondly, earlier you mentioned regarding Iran and Iran as well. So how do you see the relationship of Iran with, in terms of like IAEA, who were like looking after their nuclear asset and stuff like that? And do you see any kind of threshold for a new war coming up? And because that was a kind of strategy for isolating Iran, because everyone is regrouping in favor of Israel. It looks like that if we look at the landscape of, you can say, politics. So I'm not very good with politics, but as I see, you may correct me where I'm wrong. So obviously, so how do you see these two aspects? And because time is finishing, so we have just 15 minutes. So I would like your viewpoint on Sudan situation as well, because another problem from Arab countries, like all the wealth has been stolen from there, and now they are facing such a dire situation in terms of humanitarian crisis, people's killing and all that. So how do you see conclusively, how would you like to conclude the whole situation, and what are the most important things all Muslim or human being, as a human Muslim, we don't say, because if we were Muslim we would be supporting oppressed people in reality, but whatever is going on. So how would you like to conclude the whole discussion in those?
Well, trying to maintain objectivity, the reality is that sovereignty is important. If you're going to say you have a national body, I'm not a big nationalist, I have to admit, because I believe that in a slightly different philosophy, but nationalism is a reality. And if you're going to be a nationalist, then at least be a real nationalist and fight for your nation. What I find with the Muslim world is that they say they're nationalists, selling out as puppets to the imperialist empire, to the British colonialism just replaced by US imperialism, and now it seems like Israeli imperialism takes over a new version. And so what does that mean in terms of your future as your economy, your politics, your culture, and even your faith, your sense of self-dignity? If you're a slave, first of all, it's really a good idea to admit that you're a slave. Because if you're in denial saying that we're sovereign nations and we are Pakistan and we are this, and actually all you are puppets and slaves and beggars who go to take money from this, that and the other, then take loans which you can't repay, and then the World Bank squeezes you even more, and they drive you into more poverty and steal more of your resources. Well, that's not sovereignty, is it? That's not leaders who are giving us autonomy. That's just slaves and puppets who have been placed in power, and they have brown faces and black faces and whatever, And so we don't think we're colonized, and we can pretend that we're sovereign nations. The reality is that most of these people, they may have brown skins and they may look like they're supposedly Pakistani or whatever it is that Pakistani is meant to look like. But in reality, they're nothing but slaves. That's what I see. And so first of all, you have to ask yourself the question, do we did the dignity of independence and sovereignty? Does that mean anything to us? If it doesn't, then be a slave, carry on, do what you like. But if it does mean something to you, then you have to stand up and resist. And that means on an international level, they have to resist the American imposition. Because, for instance, in Pakistan, America wants the gold that Pakistan has discovered in certain sectors. It was very public recently. The oil that now they know that huge stash of oil off the coast of Pakistan, but they can't mine it, of course, because they don't have the technology. But they, at the moment, started wilting to the Americans. You know, all of these resources. If you can, I mean, the copper mines, for instance, in Balochistan and the various other black diamonds that exist, something like $25 trillion of wealth exists under the ground in Pakistan in one way, shape, or form. So, in order to get that, first of all, you should be investing in your own technological development, like Iran has. Iran has, in the space of 15, 20 years, developed its own technologies to the point where they can be advanced in so many fields, from nanotechnology to bioengineering and even military technology. The only thing that stops them is that the sanctions prevent them getting even more. But Pakistan doesn't have those things. So why not develop your technology? It's the only area where Pakistan does seem to be able to do. They can make J-17 aircraft technology. Well, if you can do that, you should be able to build up industries and create all sorts of other things in the country. But there's no inclination for this sort of thing because they're not allowed to. It seems as though they're not allowed to make the countries sovereign and look after the economic health and wealth of the nation. They're actually just taking whatever they can for their greedy pockets and then sending most of it out to U.S. real estate or into the banks in Wall Street or London or offshore accounts. So that's the problem. We have a real issue there where nations are not actually sovereign. So the first thing is all of the Muslim countries need to look at that. And in order to look at that, they've got a model. The Islamic Republic of Iran has since 1929 stood out, single-handedly taken on an entire system. They've been sanctioned. They've had, they've had sanctions in terms of banking, in terms of products, in terms of every other kind of technological or other mineral, etc., that has been blocked from being sent in there. They've also been stopped from providing their own goods out to many nations. Nonetheless, the resistance economy which they built was based on a knowledge power they had internally, and they developed that knowledge economy so they can create their own products, and small or large, but nonetheless, the economy is working internally to the extent that it can. Now imagine if Pakistan took the same path, made pacts with Iran, and if Iran was also to make the same pacts with Iraq, and across the entire Muslim world and West Asian world, they all decided that actually in our regional area, we will rely on our own self-defense, our own military, our own technological advancement, our own sharing of economic trade, then you would see the affluence of these nations rise exponentially because most of your trading partners are usually your neighbors. So these are all neighbors, from Saudi Arabia up to sort of Pakistan at least. There's a straight neighborhood, and it goes on right to Morocco. If these leaders weren't all sellouts and puppets, there's no reason why an Islamic economy could emerge. It doesn't mean you create one ulma or a khilafah or anything. No, you can have sovereign nations that enter into proper a kind of an economic federation of sorts. And that's the direction the Muslim world should go. Unfortunately, the minute they try to go to that, all of the leaders that are in power would be killed. And none of those leaders have any ideological inclination towards this, so they're never going to do it. That is our problem. That's the fundamental issue. It's why when the Muslim world is basically joining the Muslim world as a slave, us as slaves. We're slaves to Anglo-Zionist imperialism. They just don't put chains on. They just do it through the World Bank, and they do it through their threat of military and power and terrorism and whatnot. We've got leaders who don't really care because they're, in the first place, they come to power backed by these same forces. So that's the problem. The solution lies there because the Iranians have shown that, look, you can do it, and if they were to just be brave, have some courage, stand up alongside these guys, stop fighting each other, and start creating a more collaborative Muslim set of countries, especially in that Central West Asian region up to South Asia, that would be the most powerful force in the world overnight. They would become the most powerful body economically, perhaps politically, definitely, and maybe even militarily after a certain time if they actually bother to concentrate on themselves. That would be the dream as a vision for me.
True. So we
And
have
Sudan,
last 5 minutes. So yeah, Sudan.
yeah.
Yeah, if I wanted to.
You raised Sudan. Well, Sudan is,
Yeah.
another case. Sudan has been bending over to do whatever the Americans wanted for the last X number of years. It's never enough. They're another example of no matter what you do, no matter how much of a slave you are to the Anglo-Zionist empire, they will still
Mm.
abuse you and destroy you as and when they desire. Sudan, you'll know it's necessary for them because, first of all, the Bab el-Mandeb is the route where most of the trade goes to the Suez Canal. So it's a very, very important world trade route. The Sudanese port on the kind of left-hand side of the map, and you see the Yemenis on the right-hand side, and Somalia is important as well, and Ethiopia, Eritrea. You can see that the Americans in Somalia, in Ethiopia, and Sudan are essentially backing a genocide, backing the regime, and backing all the forces that cause problems for the governments because they want those ports, they want those countries to basically align with prior American policy. The UAE is being used in Sudan to improve their limits. What capacity does the UAE have? All their weapons come from Britain and America. Their military are trained by them. Everything they do is monitored by the intelligence agencies and the Americans remote. And of course, so anything the UAE is doing in these ports, the UAE is buying up support in Yemen, through to Somali, and all up the Sudan coast, with the United Arab Emirates, who are partners, who actually funding the operations for the Americans. The actual finances and the backing is coming from the same Anglo-Zionist imperialists, and they're not stopping them doing it. And in Sudan, of course, they created a modern day minister. They basically wiped out the wiped out so many poor civilians and killed and murdered something called the RSF. Now, the RSF are basically a proxy for Western Empire to go in and dominate Sudan. And they're threatening, essentially, they're threatening the Sudanese government to behave themselves to do exactly what they want them to do, or else the RSF will take. This is the way they operate. The Americans and the Zionists now are no longer, they've always been gangsters. They've always been a military national. But they're doing it more or less openly. They're making it clear that we don't care how many kids are killed in the world. That's the classic damage. Just as it was in Iraq or Afghanistan, now in Africa. Of course, Africa, you've got people like Traore rising up and looking for African independence. Next door, and the Americans and most of the Western powers don't like it. But look, I have to mention China. China has been also financing weapons to the RSF. So in most areas, China is like saying in Gaza, they're giving them. Well, I have to say that people who are dealing with the Brits for the Eurasian Axis in some sort of champion of morality and ethics and changing the world for the future, and multipolarity for the future, people know about. The Chinese and Russians are self-interested. They'll do things that suit them. And they're also embedded with the same kind of oligarchs and money masters in the background. So there is no solution from east or west in our common ability because they say nowhere. Islam is what you need to rely on. You need to put value and ethics, economy and politics, which depends more people, more values, more culture, then outside of the respect. But if internally you can't even do that, in Sudan, be it sort of Afghanistan, one by one, they will pick you all off and destroy you. Their hope is that somewhere in the world, the people of those people, the people of the Muslim world, will rise up against these thieves and these beggars and these puppets and sell out that are other leaders at the moment, and they would get rid of them and put forward people like Traore or people like Sani was leader Malik al-Houthi or Al Khamenei. These are leaders. This is what we call a leader, somebody who fights for their own nation and is willing to die and stand for the last man. But the Palestinians are what I describe as real sovereign people. The Lebanese resistance is what we call a sovereign people. These are the examples of that part of the Muslim world where people are standing and they have a power from the divine, and they're standing up against the world's greatest powers, and they're still there. They haven't been able to take them out. They're still there. I just wish and pray the rest of the Muslim world rises up, has revolutions in their own country, and brings to power those people who are like Ayatollah Khamenei and like the people of like Ansarullah Malik al-Houthi and like the likes of Hussein Nasrallah and others.
True. Muslim, I wanted your comment on war between Iran and do you see any war coming up in that context? Because previously from the news outlets, it felt like they are preparing for a huge war or something like that. So do you think that anything like that is possible, or is just a Trump peace policy which is very effective going on at the moment?
It's very possible. It's still on the table. They have been arming themselves hugely. The Israelis have been given massive weapons shipments, upgrade on everything. So that all indicates that Israel still wants to enter a war, but they want the Americans to come in with them. So the real key to this is if the American administration is willing to go to a direct head-on confrontation with the Islamic Republic of Iran, which they seem to be reluctant to do. Well, Trump seems to be holding back on it. And one of the obfuscations was, of course, he started picking on Venezuela, which doesn't have the same military response that Iran could do it. And he's also targeting Lebanon on a focus on Hezbollah, which is more within the military. They cannot take Iran militarily. No matter how much military action the Americans have, they cannot occupy Iran. They will face 80 million people who are fully committed. They have a terrain that they can't go and actually negotiate and actually get boots on the ground. They don't have those boots on the ground, even in West Asia, where maybe 30,000 military American personnel are. They don't have the capacity to actually have a full-on proper war. They are only going to have to resort to proxies. So they either have to persuade Azerbaijan to pick a fight with Iran, like they got Ukrainians to do with Russia. They could get sort of someone like Azerbaijan to commit because they've got a border dispute and they are Zionist puppets and the Israelis are embedded in there. They could get the PKK and the Kurds in northern Iraq to maybe join in. They could get the Balochis to uprise. They might have cells there. So they're relying on their proxies and their those people who can create insurgencies, ethnic minority groups that they pay off, or these kind of post-Shah MKO type of terror organizations. That's the only hope they've got, is that they can turn the country over from inside, or that the Iran go against the establishment that is in power. These are the two viable options. If they did enter a war, the most they would do is just some sort of short-term testing of Iran's latest defense capabilities, and if they see that they get another bloody nose, they'd go back into a peace deal. But I think before Christmas, many people are still predicting that Israel will try to make a go for it, but it has to have America on board, and that isn't a total done deal yet. So it's still very much possible. The Russians apparently have been giving Su, I think they're Sukhoi Su's class military planes, which the Iranians have purchased. I have it on good authority. And they've been upgrading the defense systems to an S-400 level. That's even rumored. And the Chinese have also been shipping various support, military support. It said, we don't know 100%, but certainly shipments and large consignments have been arriving in Iran. And Iran itself is saying that we're upgraded and we're ready. And they have a new lesson to teach Israel. And, America's depot in the West Asia is Israel. And if Iran was to destroy large swathes of it, that would cause a major problem for the Americans in the region. And I think even they have to think twice. Iran is not a joke to have to take on a full head-to-head battle. So everybody's, thinking twice about it. Let's hope it doesn't happen.
Before you go, if you wish to comment regarding Ayam Fatima, any words, anything, any thoughts you like to share regarding Janabi Sayyidah Fatima, because this is the martyrdom anniversary of Sayyidah Fatima Salamullah Alaiha is going on. So any message from his life you feel like sharing?
The whole of Sayyidah Fatima's life was one of resistance. She spent her whole life resisting one form of tyranny or another. And she's, along with Imam Ali alayhi salam, the same goes for him, the same goes for the whole of the Ahlul Bayt, the Holy Five. There wasn't a day in their lives, I think, that they weren't under some kind of tyranny or fighting some sort of tyrannical empire, whether it was the Byzantine, the Persian, whether it was the infidels, whether it was the Jahiliyyah of the Arabs. You look at the record, even when the transfer of power came to Sani in Islam's favour, they were still fighting the pagan tribes and others. There wasn't a day in the life of Sayyidah where she wasn't part of that active resistance movement. But her method of resistance is fascinating because she didn't try to take the kind of role which the Prophet had or Imam Ali. And they played their role as as they were. And her role is to be in charge of a lot of the charity work, a lot of the medical work, a lot of the support of the wounded, a lot of the looking after of the system, in the absence of the Holy Prophet during war campaigns and during the resistance. You could see that she was hugely active in terms of welfare and the development of the society, and being a role model as a woman within resistance. Today, the women of Gaza, to me, they are in a way heirs of that resistance, to be able to take the kind of military assault day on day, to tend to the wounds, to look at the children, to have the hearts to be able to survive the torment and the agony. Sayyidah Fatima, if she saw the wounds of Imam Ali or the wounds of the Prophet, peace be upon him, what could be more painful than to see the wounds of these holy souls, which were, Imam Ali is supposed to have over 130 cuts on his body during the time of the wars that he took place. And who was tending to those wounds? Who was making sure that these fighters got back and they were able to defend the honor of the Islamic way of life? It was mostly the women. And the women of resistance are a really important factor. And Bibi Zahra is not just a holy, spiritual, saintly figure as we perceive, and not just somebody that we cry for. It's somebody also that we celebrate for her life of resistance, and we have to emulate and take the leaf out of her book to say, how do we resist? And she leaves behind a very, very clear legacy of how you do that. Not only did she do it through the welfare organizations, I have to say that upon the usurping of the power of, upon usurping the right of the Ahlul Bayt, when Imam Ali's right to Wilayah was taken, who stood up? Who was the prime voice in the fight for justice and for reality and for a system? She fought for a system. It wasn't for Imam Ali directly. She knew that Wilayah was going to be a system that would keep justice in mind. It wouldn't lead to empire. It wouldn't lead to what the imperialist caliphs then did and where Muslims are today. If you're looking at Saudi Arabia and the kings of Saudi Arabia today, they are the direct descendants and ancestors, if you like, of the people who became the Umayyad imperialists. That Umayyad imperialism, which has blighted Islam and blighted Muslims rather over the centuries, is because they didn't listen to the model that Bibi Fatima stood up for in the court of Abu Bakr and said and told him to his face that what he was doing was wrong and he had committed an injustice. And that's a sign for all of us, because Bibi Zainab then took that leaf out of her book and did it again after Karbala. So you can see right through the training that was given by Hazrat Fatima Zahra to her children and to her remaining progeny is still alive today. And the Sayyid Ali Khamenei, who is there today, a son of Hazrat Fatima is emulating the same strategy, the resistance strategy that he's learned from his ancestors. And inshallah, we should all take a leaf from that book. Don't be scared of Zionists, don't be scared of imperialists, don't worry about your jobs going too much. There is a level where you should be concerned about your own families. But there's also a time, if you ask the question, was Bibi Zahra worried about their income at any stage for engaging in this resistance, this fight against tyranny? Were they worried about having no bread, no food in the house? No, they carried on. They lived at the most basic level most of their lives. You know, there was barely any food, and if they had, they would often just give it out. As Khadija had said, having wealth was not as important as giving it to the people and for the cause of Islam. That's the attitude we should have. So we should learn practically what Ahlul Bayt were about, not just mourn them and revere them and pretend that we're sort of, you know, really following them, when in reality what we're doing is we're picking and choosing which aspects we want to follow. And those which are easy we do, and the tough ones like resistance and taking on tyranny and imperialism and standing up and being counted, those things we try to ignore because we know they'll affect our incomes and our material wealth. I think that's wrong. We have to have a better balance and speak out more than we are at the moment in terms of the tyranny that's going on and act against it.
Yeah, that's very true. Thank you, Muslimai. But I just one more question, because I'm just waiting for my other guest as well. But I want your viewpoint on that as well. Like, if we talk about Maktab-e Tashayyu, for example, particularly, and school of Shiaism or whatsoever you call it. So, and we are celebrating like from past 3 weeks, Ayam Fatima. So what you mentioned is the role of resistance. So why do you think? I mean, it's been long time since we are like sharing, listening, watching these characters, whether it's the Bibi Zainab Salamullah Alaiha's character, Hazrat Khatija, Janab Zainab Salamullah Alaiha, and now Hazrat Fatima, and many more our ladies who have done the same job as Janab Sayyida Fatima Salamullah Alaiha. But obviously, the strongest of all at the moment is Hazrat Fatima Salamullah Alaiha. So why do you think we couldn't take the element of resistance within ourselves? Because we can't even resist our own selves, and then we can't even resist in front of anything in front of us. So where we are lacking, how do you see the role of tashayyu in this day and age, when everything you have mentioned earlier in part one, as we were discussing, what kind of role do you think we owe as a Shia follower of Hazrat Fatima and Ahlul Bayt?
I think that the Holy Imams continued that tradition of resistance all through their lives. Anybody who wants to look at their lives, you will see it most clearly through the lens of resistance. That, you know, whether Imam Raza in your time, Imam Itaqi in your time, you saw that they were constantly having to engage pirates. Often they were two-faced hypocrites, and they could even keep on their own course. But the resistance of the Imams came in this way, that they told truth to power. Oh, always. They never compromised with money received or Amin received or, whichever you want to talk about. But there was first of all an attempt to keep those tyrants, they could stop being such, despots. There was an effort to remind them that Islam was relevant and that it should be destroyed completely within the Islam world. They protected the rights of people, the rights to be maintained, even though they were leaving. It were basically drunkards, half of them were homosexuals in the ground, many of them were fornicators, and all sorts of drunkards. They did everything under the sun, but somehow the Imams played their role in trying to protect the values of Islam, the general politics of religion. So these were successes, and they did it also through educating, through debates, through discussion, but always at the heart of it, they had knowledge, and they had the practice, the akhlaq, the heart, and they taught not only the open knowledge of the prudence, but they, more importantly, also taught people the ethics of the manner, and they taught them how to live Islam. So I think the first thing is that from the that tradition continued, and of course the movements that constantly change or challenge power, we usually share them. Whether it would be even the Abbasid revolution that took over from Umayyad, that was rooted in imamjafaresadiq, and they used those tribes and then of course they too became imperialists, but actually Islam, it was Ahlul Bayt, who were, on the basis of their track record of honesty, integrity, and resistance, they were constantly used by people to stand up to that, to the power that existed that was evil. Now, Shias today, the problem is that there are two kinds of Shia, at least. There may be many more, but the two that come, I want to distinguish between now is those who have an attitude which is rather like the Shia perhaps had under the Safavid Empire. So the Safavid Empire in Iran gave Shiism the precedence, but in it, there was also this undeclared reality that religion should slightly separate from politics in a way, because the empire, if it could control people who were Shia, then it was okay. But if those Shia themselves started pointing to the tyranny of perhaps the Safavids or similarities that they committed, then that was not going to be allowed. Empire is the same, whether they put a Shia label on it or a Sunni label or whatever. Imperialists are the same. Their primary purpose is to gain money, power, and be dominant, essentially. So, this is not the purpose of the Alawi tradition. It's not the purpose of the Muhammadi tradition. It's not the purpose of Ahlul Bayt. The purpose of life is to create fairness, justice, and to create a society which looks after the poor and the weak. And that often means that you have to take on power. Now, whether or not the Shia over that period of time with the Safavids became institutionalized is a question we have to ask. That have many Shias adopted only rituals and only the outer aspects of Islam, the Shari principles and the observance of worship to God, and forgotten resistance because we weren't meant to, because we were also deprogrammed from the idea of challenging tyranny, because we spent this time 200-300 years under Safavid rule, and we too, like the Sunni fraternity, forgot that actually standing for justice is absolutely vital. It's a central part of our Rasul-e-Din. At least within the Shia, it's that. It's not even that within the Sunni school, but we have justice at the heart. You can't ignore that. So those who today amongst the Shia argue that we shouldn't be involved with the Islamic Republic of Iran, we should be in resistance, we shouldn't take on all these Zion imperialist powers, and we should just do our rituals and our ibadat, and we should have majalis, and just do all those things which are to do with remembrance of Imam Hussein, and we should cry for him and whatever, and actually do nothing practically against modern day tyranny, they're wrong. Because if the Imam is here today, if you believe in an active living Imam al-Mahdi, if you believe in his existence, then what is he? Is he telling, do you really think that in any kind of activism, he'll be simply showing you how to pray or doing rituals or following the Ayam Fatima or following the Muharram rituals? Is that all Imam Mahdi Akhir Zaman is going to bring for you? Or is it that he wants something more? Well, it's quite clear from all the eschatology I've read that Imam is going to be a revolutionary, and he's going to be a resistance force, and he will demand justice, and he will impose it. Now, if you say, oh, it's only the job of the Imam to do this, then that goes against the fundamental principles of Ahlul Bayt and Imam Ali, because they fought this resistance, they fought this imperialism. And they did it in different ways. I'll grant you that not everybody has to pick up a weapon or go on jihad in terms of military terms. There is the jihad of the tongue. There's the jihad of through your own actions. There's the jihad of educating others about right and wrong, about justice and injustice. But there is absolutely no excuse for us to not engage in social justice, political justice, cultural justice at any point. And I think that those scholars who are also being shut up in Britain, for instance, or the West, who are self-censoring themselves because they're scared to talk about these things from the pulpit, from the podium, then I think that's wrong. And you can do your taqiyas if you like. If you think taqiyya is the modus operandi and that's the way you want to operate, and you want to whatever you believe, well, okay, that's your choice. But believe me, the establishment knows, the imperialist establishment knows you. They know exactly who you are, what your ideology is, and they only leave if you're absolutely compliant and you just say, it's okay, let the people who are protesting for Palestine be arrested, we won't say anything about it. Let's let our freedom of speech be taken, we don't say anything about it here in Britain. Let's let them carry on creating surveillance, techniques, for monitoring us more and more. We don't do anything about it. Let them have digital currency, for instance, and they can impose even more control as to how we work. This is all zulm. This is all tyranny, but it's different levels of tyranny. So if you don't want to talk about going and fighting for Palestinians in Gaza or joining the Lebanese resistance or whatever, which is like against the laws of this land, because they've prescribed the H groups. So if you were even to say you were going to do that, you'd be legally, in trouble. The fact is, there are other ways of resisting, which is looking at the zulm and the tyranny that's happening in our own society. Your own children are constantly assaulted by all sorts of draconian brainwashing of ideologies absolutely against our principles or the principles of Ahlul Bayt. You need to resist that. Whether it's sexual education at young ages and whatnot, or finding alternative systems where you don't have to subject children to things like that. This is part of resistance. Helping those people who are being targeted for their freedom of speech on Facebook and social media and are being targeted in a bad way just because they speak the truth about zulm and tyranny around the world. Standing up for them. The Filton 24, I think it is now, they're going in trial this week. How many of our community will be there supporting? There is one Shia young lady who's in that fraternity. How many of us are mobilized on that? How many of us might turn up to give them even moral support? How many of us will write to MPs? How many of us will protest the fact that these people are being kept for 2 years in prison under terror laws for doing virtually nothing? Does that not bother anybody that these young women, ordinary civilians, have been incarcerated, and before their trials come, they'll even have probably 1 year, 2 years having spent in jail? Who's going to give them those 2 years back if they're proved to be innocent afterwards? Why is there a judicial system here which keeps them locked for 2 years, takes away their liberty? Is that acceptable? No, it's not. This is part of being a Shia. To stand up to this is no different. Looking at also our political parties and looking at the robbery that goes on, the lies, the cheating, the media, speaking out against that is also important. It's all part of, I would call, resistance, because these are all things that imams did in their own time, in their own way. They didn't have modern digital, censorship or whatever, but they were censored in other ways, but they found techniques to go around it. Imamjafaresadiq, all of them had methods of transferring the resistance model and ideology of Islam through sources, even though they were monitored and under surveillance constantly. The same thing that we're getting done to us now through our gadgets, through our phones, through our all these modern techniques they've got. This is all part of oppression. And of course, you can talk about Gaza and the people there. Well, they've used AI. They've used all of these modern techniques to track individual journalists. They've killed more journalists and specifically targeted them with drones than any of the other wars put together in the last 200 years. Put all the wars in the last 150 years together, and there's been more journalists killed in this situation. Why? Because they have the technology to do it specifically. And they can do this. Now, what makes you think that same technology, same drones, those same methods of killing people won't be used on you? What gives us the guarantee? Once we've allowed it with Israel, what on earth gives you the impression that they won't say, oh, right, we got away with it there. Why can't we try it out in West? So that if you object, again, China, I'll raise China again. If you live in China, anything you say on Facebook, anything you say on social media gets recorded, it's passed on, and they end up linking it to your social credit system. So you basically are docked from financial rights. All sorts of, if you don't, if you haven't complied with Chinese totalitarian diktat. Now that's the system they want to bring here. They actually like the Chinese totalitarian system, and what you're getting is a gradual erosion of your freedom and an increase of surveillance capitalism and totalitarianism. We should stand against that. So, I think Gaza can also be a distraction for many of us, because we're all so concerned about what's going on there that we've forgotten that here, Agenda 2030 and the rollout of control mechanisms and a taking away of our liberties and an increased tyranny, which even the police are being empowered to do openly. You've seen 80, 90-year-old women being thrown to the ground, picked up, thrown in the back of ambulances or in the back of police vans and arrested and taken away. And now they're facing terror charges. This is the Defend Our Juries thing, which is a controversial issue in itself, because they've also been naughty, because they've been telling the people to put on their placards signs which say, we support PAL action. Well, that's illegal. And they shouldn't be doing that to those people, because they're going to get arrested. And that's what's been happening. So there's now a claim that there's a psychological operation, and that's been deliberately done by establishment within Defend Our Juries, who've been getting people arrested so that they can make even more laws. You see, this is just one example of tyranny that the Shia here in the West or in Britain must stand against. But instead, if we've adopted the self-compliance model of Shiism, rather than the Ahlul Bayti resistance model of Shiism, then what's going to happen is you become, you say anything the system does is okay, and so long as I'm getting my professional wages, why should I care? That is a dangerous philosophy, because it means that tomorrow they will come for you as well.
And insightful analysis you have shared with us. Really grateful for your time. The time is up now, so inshallah we'll try to take you in next time, inshallah, for another topic, inshallah. Thanks a lot for your deeper analysis. And as Muslim Bhai said, if justice is not served, we can't actually are free in no matter where we are. So the thing is, we all have to resist against the tyranny in whatsoever we see it. So we need to choose our battlefield whichever way we can. So thank you so much, Muslim Bhai, for your time and participation.